Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to instructor video number 4. I can't believe that we're basically halfway through this class already. I'm excited though. I think that you guys have been doing a really good job. Your discussion boards the past week have been really good quality. So A++ to everybody for that. Please be sure that you are reading my feedback through the rubrics when you're looking at your discussion board grades. There are some times when I offer up some information of how to get some more points in the future and possibly get points back on your current discussion boards that I was actually grading. So make sure that you're actually looking at those so you can have that information and utilize it. Well, let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 6. So Chapter 6 of the text starts off by telling us who the police are and what demographics make up the police force in the United States. In the early days of policing, police officers mainly consisted of high school educated white men, and the majority of police today are still mostly high school educated white men. But there has been a consistent drive both from within the police force and from the public to have greater numbers of women and minorities in the police force. There is a fair amount of research that actually supports that the more a police force looks like the community they serve, the lower the rate of crime within that community. So that's something to consider. Currently, minorities make up roughly 25% of the police force, and women make up roughly 13% of the police force. Both groups, however, particularly women of color, still face difficulties, and there are still issues within the police force that people have to deal with, that women and minorities have to deal with. For example, women in particular report higher levels of stress and sexual harassment while serving in the police force, and they also report a greater difficulty gaining acceptance from their male peers and counterparts. When considering education, most police forces don't actually require any type of education. They do require like continuing education to stay current on police issues and to stay updated on their training. But most police forces don't require any higher education. That's becoming slightly more common. Roughly 1/3 of police forces do want police officers coming in to have at least some college, and sometimes when moving into higher positions, there is a preference or a requirement for more education. So just recognizing that there is a change in the police force at this point in time, and the demographics of the police force at this point in time, is something that is good. That's something that we can commend the police force in general on today. But when looking at the diversity of the police force, you cannot ignore the influence that police culture has on attracting recruits into the field. So police culture, like any other workplace culture, has well-defined ideals and values that differentiate itself from other professions. These include cynicism, loyalty, um, the idea that the public does not understand the job and that the public is really unsupportive of the police, and that no one outside, including family members, will ever be able to understand what the job entails as a police officer. So these factors really help to make up the blue wall, or the blue curtain as it's called in your text, that divides police officers from their own communities and the people within them. The results of these beliefs and values are distinct policing styles that officers typically take on through their work. These are discussed in your text as the crime fighter. This is the person who believes the most important part of their job is to investigate serious crimes and to apprehend criminals. There's the social agent, who believes that police should be involved in numerous aspects of community building that aren't really limited to law enforcement. You also have the law enforcer, who focuses on enforcement while sidelining other duties. So these are the people who, different from the crime fighter, they're not really worried about investigating serious crime or focusing on serious crime. They're just saying, hey, I'm just here to enforce the law. They're the by the book people. And then you have the watchmen, the people who actually focus on just maintaining order. That's all they want out of their community, is just for it to be orderly and to move forward through their days, just making sure that that is the status quo. It's really important to understand the relationships generated from these kind of almost like stereotypes that are taken on by police, or these kind of roles that are taken on by police, because it does have an effect on how the actual police force, any given police force, interacts with one another, and how they interact with their communities. Without that understanding, it's going to be harder for you all to recognize where some of the issues in policing actually stem from. If we understand how people think and feel about their jobs, then we can also understand where some of the issues might be from their perspective, and then make it easier to actually address those issues in the future. The rest of the chapter looks at specific issues in policing and how they are handled by officers. One of the things that's really well focused on in the chapter is police discretion. Police discretion is highly debated today because of the effects of implicit biases or unfair practices, such as arrest quotas. And these can make the use of police discretion, because these can make the use of police discretion unfair or unjust. So discretion at its roots, though, it's really a form of decision making. And that decision making is granted to police officers so they can better serve their communities. But many other factors can actually influence an officer's discretion. Their emotional intelligence, your book covers legal factors, environmental factors, departmental factors, factors within the actual situation that an officer is dealing with and determining how they're going to handle the situation, the person themselves, and of course, an officer's peers. With all of these extra influences, the use of discretion just it continues to be very, very debated, and how to best actually regulate the use of discretion, and whether it should even be regulated or not. All of this, though, all of the concern around police discretion, the discussion around police discretion is really closely tied to another issue covered in your text, the use of force. So while the use of force is not common in the United States, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, Black and Hispanic persons are far more likely to be threatened with the use of force, as well as men are much more likely to be threatened with the use of force than women. Two particular cases, Tennessee v. Garner and Graham v. Connor, lay out the standards that actually control the use of deadly force and the non-deadly force objective reasonableness standard. I highly suggest reading up a little bit more on particularly the non-deadly force objective of reasonableness standard, because that continuum has really come down to a great deal of interpretation and how it actually plays out. And the Supreme Court hasn't actually put any specific decisions that actually enforce how that that continuum is actually used today. So I highly suggest just maybe even doing a Google search and checking out some other information and other perspectives on it, so you get a really good understanding of that information. There will be a couple of links included in this post for you to be able to see if that'll, for you to be able to use to see if that'll be able to help you out. Last but not least, the last thing discussed in the chapter are problems of policing, issues that police directly deal with as a result of their positions. The ones that are covered in your text include stress, fatigue, isolation, exposure to violence and the use of violence and brutality, a little bit of on harassment and corruption. Even though policing is not the most dangerous job in the United States, it's definitely one of the most dangerous jobs in the United States. And you have to remember that the stress that comes with being a police officer can really affect how a person is able to function throughout their day and function within their job. Stress due to constant vigilance, to forced independence, a lack of training or a lack of supervision. All of that really boils down into where you see some of these kind of stereotypes, some of these roles, and some of these beliefs that the police really take on, that police officers take on, both individually and as a whole. So as you're reading through that information, consider what it would actually take for you to really understand the stress that comes with that position, other than obviously becoming a police officer yourself. Be sure to actually reflect on this information and to say, okay, where is the line? Is there a particular line that states, that you would be able to find where this person is stressed and actually needs assistance in comparison to somebody who is also stressed but may not need assistance from their peers or from other people within the force? How do those interactions actually relate to one another, and how do they define one another? Well, that's all I have today for Chapter 6. I highly suggest using the PowerPoints that are attached if you have any questions, or if you want a brief summary review of the information before you take your next exam this weekend. As always, if you have any questions or concerns for me about the information covered in your text, please reach out and let me know. My email is back up. Yay! So if you need anything, just let me know, and I hope you all have a great day. Thanks.